The long view. I'm going to be preaching over the next 4 Sundays, including today, about the power of taking the long view in life. This morning's sermon is going to be Turn the Page. It's really kind of the pre-long view sermon. That is, before we can take the long view, we have to be able to turn the page. But let me say a word about why I think this particular approach is important. Over the last few years, one of the most powerful insights for me has been the conviction that we live best, we live most powerfully, and we live most faithfully if we are able to take the long view, to see way out into the distance, have faith about what lays out there. As human beings, we instinctively, most of us do just the opposite. We take the short view. We are myopic, nearsighted. We tend to see a few steps in front of us, or maybe to the bend in the corner, the bend in the road. We wonder what's around the bend in the road, but we tend to just see a little bit in front of us. Therefore, we live from triumph to triumph, or from crisis to crisis, or for most of us, maybe some combination of the two. We live from triumph to crisis to triumph to crisis. You know how it goes. Now, to illustrate this, I want to show you a chart. It's a familiar chart for some of you. Can you all see that? This light is really light coming in through this east window. You can't tell what it is, but a lot of you have seen it before. This is a chart of the movement of the Dow Jones Industrial Average between 1900 and 1920. Now, let me say to you that I am in no way suggesting that living the good life is synonymous with the stock market. I know some of you think it is, but it's not. But I do think this is a good way to illustrate the difference between taking the short view and the long view. What you'll see here, 1900 to 1920, you'll see a little bit of progress, but basically up and down, up and down. Lots of peaks and lots of valleys. If you stop and think about your own life, that's pretty consistent with life itself, isn't it? Lots of peaks and lots of valleys. Sorrows and griefs, joys and celebrations. But let's look at this next slide. This is the stock market between 1900 and today. And what you see there are lots of peaks and valleys, but they are evened out by the long view, aren't they? The trajectory of the stock market over the last century or so has been upward. Now, I'm not your broker, so I want to, the regular kind of, this past performance is no guarantee, so I'm not suggesting that you buy stocks. I am suggesting that the life in Christ is lived best when we see it with the long view, and that when we are faithful, that it can be a kind of upward trajectory over the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys that we all experience in life, the triumphs and the crises. But before we can take the long view, we have to be able to kind of turn the page and move from the past into the future. So I brought another prop this morning. Where is it? How many of you know what this is? Can you all remember these? This is a calendar. This is what we used to use to keep track of our schedules. This one actually belongs to a staff member who still keeps her calendar manually. She is the one person who is less technologically competent than I. I'm not going to tell you her name, but her initials are Mary Harris. I'll always remember a staff meeting years ago. We were at the Glencliff location, and I guess it was late November, and somebody was passing out the new program calendars. And I always remember something that Pat Messick said at the time. He picked up, this is the manual calendar that I have for the ranch. I picked it up yesterday. It's about cows. And Pat picked up his calendar, and he opened it, and he said, "Oh, I love the new year and the new calendar." He said, "I love to look at my calendar. No erasures, no whiteouts, no mistakes. Just a clean slate. The opportunity to start over again." That's pretty important, isn't it? To be able to somehow take the old calendar and turn the page and pick up the new opportunity to start over again. Well, let's be honest about this. This would be nothing more than a kind of silly self-help lecture on keeping your New Year's resolutions, if it were not for the fact that the gospel speaks over and over again about the power of new beginnings in Jesus Christ. You see, New Year's resolutions for Christians are different than those that everybody else takes. I heard on the radio this morning, I think it was, that 70% of New Year's resolutions are lost or given up within the first 30 days. But for Christians, the power of Christ, there really is the opportunity to turn the page, to start a new direction, to begin anew because of the power and guidance of Christ in your life. So now let me turn to our text this morning. It says in your bulletin, the first chapter of Matthew. That's wrong, of course. It's the second chapter of Matthew. And there are all sorts of texts we could use about new beginnings in Christ. But this is the one that's seasonally appropriate. It's about the wise men. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for this child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. Upon entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then this last verse is the one we're aiming for right here. "And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road, by a new direction." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. A number of years ago, I was on the highway west of Fort Worth driving, and I saw a big billboard that said, it was in the month of December before Christmas, "Those who are wise still take a new direction after they've met Christ." So this understanding about the wise men, this wonderful interpretation about this last verse about the wise men is not new with me. And Denise didn't think it up, or Bart. Preachers have been preaching it a long, long time. This powerful insight that once you have encountered Christ, you inevitably take a new direction in your life. Matthew puts it this way: they went home by another road. And so what I would say to you this morning is that in order to take the long view and to live faithfully by what God presents to us as opportunities for the remainder of our lives, whatever that might look like for you or for me, in order for us to do that, we need to be able to turn the page, leave the past behind, and take up a new direction. And the question for you and for me is a simple one. Has Christ made a difference in your life or in my life? And has Christ empowered us to go in a new direction, leaving the past behind? Since we're so short on time, we could preach this for probably a couple of hours if we were to use all the different ways in which this can play out in our lives. I want to talk about just one thing this morning as an example of what it means to take a new direction. And that is the ability to leave behind old grievances, resentments, sins, forgive those who have hurt you, forgiving yourself. A couple of years ago, I was in a very small Texas town, eating breakfast in a very small cafe. And there was a man over at the corner table. He was obviously there with his regular cronies drinking coffee. If you know anything about small Texas towns, you know what I mean. He was older than I. I would judge him to have at least been in his late 60s, probably in his early or mid 70s. I was not eavesdropping on this conversation. He was talking so loud that everybody in the cafe could not help but be a part of the conversation. And of course, it was a small town. Everybody knew everybody. I was the only stranger there. And he launched into a diatribe about his mother, whom he referred to as Mama. And he kept saying, Mama this and Mama that, back when Mama did such and such, and his friends, all elderly, I don't know, elderly, let me use a better word, all senior citizens around him, of which I am one these days. His friends all sat there passively listening to him go on and on about his mama. Here's what I gathered. Evidently, his mother years earlier, I assume 30 or 40 years earlier, had done something which had demonstrated to him her partiality for his sister or his brother rather than for him. And now here he was, his mother long dead and buried, and he still could not give it up. On and on he went about how Mama had hurt him. Now that might sound ludicrous to you, but the truth of the matter is that most of us are victims of that kind of thinking in some way or another, aren't we? I was reading a columnist this past week in the New York Times, and I want you to know I'm an equal opportunity reader. I read the Times and the Journal. So he was talking about those bad memories that come unbidden at 4 o'clock in the morning. I know about those. You do too, don't you? Those things that haunt us come unbidden at 4 o'clock in the morning. So we may not be so silly as to hold something against our mother that happened 30 or 40 years ago, but the fact of the matter is that most of us have trouble giving up things that have taken place in the past. Forgiving and forgetting others who have hurt us, and oftentimes forgiving and forgetting the stupid things that we ourselves have done. And yet what I would say to you this morning is that power in Christ, coming to the manger as the wise men did, coming to the manger gives us power in Christ to turn the page, to leave the past behind, and to start forward in a powerful new way, a new direction in Christ. And I'm going to close by giving to you, I think, the most powerful example I can think of. It is the story of Nelson Mandela, whose life we celebrated richly over the last few weeks. I've thought a lot about Nelson Mandela, about what it was that made him such a great human being. Arguably, one of the 2 or 3 most influential human beings in the last half and the first decade, last half of the 20th century, first decade of the 21st century. Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., 1 or 2 others maybe. And I don't think it was the fact that he was a brilliant attorney. I don't think that it was that he was a really, really bright guy with an enormous commitment to ending apartheid in his country and in Africa. I don't think it was the fact that he was highly committed to other human beings, that he was a wonderful friend to so many people. All of those are important elements of the personality of Nelson Mandela. But I think what gave him such power was the commitment he made the day he walked out of jail, out of prison after 26 years, to forgive those who had hurt him. A lot of us say it, few of us do it. I read a little bit about the 26 years that Mandela spent in prison. Some of it was just god-awful. That's the only thing you can say about it. He was in solitary confinement much of the time, able to communicate with his family only once every 6 months. If anyone had an opportunity or reason to carry a grudge, he did. But Mandela walked out of prison with the conviction that he was going to forgive them, to leave the past behind. And I believe that when he actually accomplished that, his life was filled with power. Let me be specific. His life was filled with spiritual power. I read a quote during the time that we were celebrating his life. We'll put it up here for you. I think it's a wonderful, this is something that maybe most of us ought to have on our refrigerator door. He once said, "Resentment is the poison we swallow, thinking it will kill someone else." How true. I think about that man in the cafe. His resentment toward his mother slowly killing him one day at a time. Resentment is the poison we swallow, thinking it will hurt someone else when in fact it will slowly destroy our own lives. And so Mandela walked out of that prison. He decided to turn the page, to pick up a new future, a new opportunity, to live a new life in Christ. And it filled him with power. He took the long view. He changed the world. So I'll repeat. Has Christ made a difference in your life? If so, walk out of that self-imposed prison, leave the past behind, and pick up the new opportunity to live powerfully and faithfully, loving God, serving others, transforming lives, and discover that the life most transformed will be yours.